Stop! Your electricity is a 100-year monopoly lie. Did you know your power bill isn't really a bill? It's a 100-year subscription you never signed up for. I mean, seriously, you pay so someone else controls a switch you don't own. Talk about a relationship. The stakes, blackouts you can't prevent, rate hikes you can't vote on, rooftop solar stalled by studies, a fragile grid that the model incentivizes you to depend on. So here's the question. Was the grid built to serve you or to meter you forever? Follow the money, the laws, and the wire. Start at your hallway meter, the world you live in. Step into your hallway. That gray box with the spinning numbers or the digital one flickering, that's not neutral hardware. It's the business model on your wall. Every month you do the ritual, open the bill, pass the "We Care" banner, land on the total, wince, promise to use less, then pay anyway because apparently we like refrigerators. Here's a fun fact. Your meter sits at the end of a machine built around it. Power gets made at big plants you can't see, pushed onto high-voltage highways, stepped down, dripped through neighborhood wires, then click measured at your house. That click is everything. It's where infrastructure turns into vending. They don't sell electricity like apples. They sell permission to use electrons at their price in their territory under their terms. The model incentivizes that. You might be surprised to learn your local utility has no rivals. For most of us, it's a geographic franchise, one company, one territory, like cable TV back when you had to accept the box. And the logic goes, it's a natural monopoly. One set of wires is more efficient than two. Sounds neat. Safety, order, fewer holes in the street. But once you write rules around that, everything after starts to serve the meter, not you. Let's be honest, the bill reads like a secret menu. You've got the per kilowatt hour price. Then fuel, riders, system benefits, modernization fees, maybe a storm recovery that outlives the storm. Most of it points to one promise. The company recovers costs plus a return for investors. The fine print makes it happen. Safety is real. No one wants backfeed while crews work in a storm. But neutrality, not so much. Incentives are baked in. When returns are tied to capital, poles, wires, substations, the model incentivizes building and selling more, not you using less. That's why your meter matters. It turns capital into cash flow. Stakes for you are simple and painful. Bills creep up even when you behave. Storms and heat waves remind you who holds the switch, and self-generation hits walls. You buy panels. Here come studies, fees, schedules that slip. You add a battery. Cool as long as it's a grid asset when they want it and a dead box when the line goes down. Freedom sold back as a feature. Surprisingly, it feels permanent because it's old. We inherit systems like furniture, but this wasn't born neutral. It was designed, standardized, legalized. The key choice was how do we get cheap, efficient power? It was how do we meter everyone and make revenue dependable? Once your wall has a meter and the law lets one company read it, money flows one way. Here's our question. Was this built to help you use energy well or to make sure you keep paying? If the foundation is a subscription, every time you try to get efficient, better appliances, rooftop solar, sharing power, the model pushes back. Not by accident, by design. So start where the design started. Don't stare at the bulb, stare at the meter. Then rewind. To see your hallway now, we need to meet the people who turned that little box into an empire. The first meter and service territories. So picture the first electric scene, late 1800s city blocks. Power wasn't a giant web yet, it was scrappy. A shopkeeper ran a little DC dynamo in the back. Down the street, a neighborhood plant burned coal for a few blocks. Lines were short, voltage was low. People knew who owned the machine because they could point to the chimney. If something broke, the fix was a few doors away. But cities grew fast and politicians loved bright streets. Here's where the deals start. Mayors handed out exclusive city franchises. You light the streets, you wire our neighborhoods, and we won't let rivals tear up the roads. In return, companies got a legal promise, one territory, one operator. That phrase, service territory, sounds boring. It is, it's a fence. It says inside these lines you sell, outside you don't. Competition moved from the street to city hall. Now about the meter. Early on, some places sold electric service like a gym membership, flat monthly fees for light. Cute, simple, terrible for profits. If customers crammed more bulbs on the line, the company ate the cost. So engineers and accountants teamed up and the kilowatt-hour meter showed up. It looked like a small trophy on your wall, spinning when you used power, quiet when you didn't. Instead of paying for having electricity, you paid for each unit you used. Suddenly, every minute your lights were on, the wheel moved and money flowed. The meter turned electricity into a perfect vending machine, and that vending machine changed incentives. Selling more units meant more revenue, which justified more wires, more stations, more everything. Efficiency. That was nice for engineers and ad campaigns, but the business engine purred when sales rose. That's the lock. A flat fee didn't push volume. A meter did. The more your life electrified, irons, toasters, radios, the faster the dial spun, the happier the balance sheet. Enter Samuel Insull, the guy who saw the big picture. He started as Edison's right hand, then took over in Chicago and wrote the playbook. His thing was the massing of production. Build larger, centralized plants for scale, then spread costs over more customers. In the 1900s and 1910s, that sounded like public service and smart business. Cheaper per unit, right? The second half was grow and build. Add customers, extend wires, stack capital on the book. Ask city leaders for exclusive territories in exchange for steady street lighting and cheap light. It worked because the math was seductive. Bigger steam turbines were more efficient. Longer lines reached more meters. If volume kept growing, average costs fell. With an exclusive franchise, you could bank on that volume. Insull pushed to replace scattered DC pockets with integrated AC systems that shipped power across a metro area. Not just tech, leverage. When one system fed everyone, no one wanted duplicate poles and trench wars. One grid, one boss. Public versus private power popped up early. Some towns built municipal plants saying, if we're granting a monopoly, we might as well own it. Private utilities shot back with ads about efficient management and cheap light under business discipline. Voters bounced between rate relief now and promises of professional operation later. Court fights sorted who could lay wires where, but the drumbeat was the same. Territories were exclusive, and the meter ruled the relationship. Here's a twist you probably didn't hear in school. As AC spread, long-distance transmission didn't just beat DC on physics, it unlocked empire building. If you can push electrons dozens of miles without big losses, you can shut down local engines and pull people onto a central plant with your meter at the edge. Small hydro on a river. Cute, but outside the standardized plan. Combined heat and power behind a factory gate. Inefficient to regulate, said the lawyers, even if it was efficient in practice. Standardization won because it made control simpler. So what did the average person see? Brighter streets, more plugs in the house, falling prices per bulb for a while, and bills that finally seemed rational because they mapped to use. Behind that, though, was a model that depended on you feeding the meter. Companies argued for exclusive service territories to avoid wasteful duplication, then used the certainty to plan ever more capital spending, which in turn needed more sales to look wise. A neat circle. And there's the incentive trap baked right at the start. If you used less, the company's revenue fell, but the investment sat there. If factories ran less at night, the giant plant ran emptier. So sales campaigns pushed electrify everything long before hashtags. Fridges replaced ice, electric ranges replaced coal stoves. Ads told homemakers that more outlets meant modern life, not just culture, cash flow. By the time the first big city system settled, the crucial elements were in place. Exclusive territories granted by local government, meters on every wall translating life into revenue, and a corporate playbook that tied bigger plants and longer wires to dominance. Safety and engineering were real concerns, sure, but the structure wasn't neutral. It was tuned. And once the standard crystallized, the next step was obvious. If the model depends on territory and a meter, you don't leave that to chance. You put it into law. The war of currents, reframed. So here's where the physics story flips. We're told it was Edison's DC versus Westinghouse and Tesla's AC. AC won because transformers step voltage up and down so you can ship power with fewer losses. True, what we skip is why long distance mattered. AC wasn't just a better wire. It was the business plan that let one company feed whole cities from a few giant plants and meter every last socket. Did you know the gruesome PR stunts, electrocuting animals, the first electric chair, weren't just nerd grudges, they were bids for control of city franchises. See, their system is dangerous, ours is safe. Safety mattered, yes, but the pitch slid neatly into politics. Give us the exclusive deal, we'll keep your streets bright and your voters happy. And once AC proved it could push power miles out, local DC shops looked less like community enterprise and more like messy noise in the way of a clean, centralized grid. Here's a fun fact. Long-distance AC forced a choice. If power could be piped from a big plant, why tolerate dozens of little engines behind shops? Utilities lobbied for ordinances that banned duplicate wires, limited small generators, and set standards on their terms. Standards sound neutral. In practice, they pick winners. AC's tech win opened a political door and utilities walked through it. You might be surprised to learn how fast the language shifted once AC took the lead. Talk about economies of scale, and massing of production became virtue. Small became inefficient. User-owned systems became unsafe. The narrative draped physics over profit. If bigger is cheaper per unit, then bigger must be better for everyone. Therefore, one network. Therefore, one operator. Therefore, one meter at each end. And if one operator, then it makes no sense to let others string a second wire or sell across the fence. Let's be honest, the choice between AC and DC didn't have to kill local generation. You can run DC microgrids in buildings and neighborhoods today. People did then too. But central station AC paired with City Hall exclusivity was a power move, literally and legally. Once a single AC network supplies a whole district, the political calculus changes. Duplicating poles looks wasteful. Two competing rates confuse voters. And when a blackout happens, the incumbent uses it as leverage. We need authority, and we need money to upgrade. Don't let amateurs tinker. The fear campaign wasn't only about arc lights and accidents. It was about who gets to decide. Utilities argued that only a centralized operator could coordinate frequency, manage peaks, and keep crews safe. Some of that's true. Coordinating a live network is hard, but look at what followed. Laws against third wires, rules restricting resale to your neighbor, permits that turned a small generator into a legal saga. Safety cases became the template for turf cases. Physics supplied the rationale. Franchises supplied the lock. And here's the clever twist. AC's technical edge multiplied the value of the meter. With DC shops, a lot of power never crossed a utility boundary. With AC networks, almost every watt went through a utility-owned substation and landed on customer meters. That's not just tidy engineering, it's metering paradise. If the business model is sell more units to more endpoints, you want one spine and thousands of little mouths at the edge. AC plus exclusivity gave exactly that. People saw the upside. Brighter, steadier light, appliances that didn't stall, lower prices for a while, but every win deepened dependence. If your block used to have a backup engine and now it's gone, your choice is gone too. And when AC expansion ripped out little DC systems, it also removed the social memory that you could make your own. Over time, we forgot the world where the person who ran the wires lived close enough to knock on their door. This is where the natural monopoly story gels. Once AC knit regions together, the argument that electricity delivery should be one network under one operator felt, well, natural. The leap from AC is efficient to therefore no competitors happened in boardrooms and council chambers, not labs. And once that leap was locked in, the gear clicked. Cost of service regulation, guaranteed returns on built assets, growth paid back through your spinning dial. So when we say the war of currents was a corporate turf war hiding behind physics, that's what we mean. AC didn't just defeat DC, central stations defeated neighborhoods, long lines defeated short walks. The belief in one best way defeated the hassle of letting many small ways exist. And with that reframing, the next move became obvious. If centralized AC plus exclusive franchises make the money machine hum, you don't leave it to tradition. You write it into law, you build commissions to guard it, and you make sure that meter at your hallway keeps doing what it was always designed to do, count forever. Legalizing the monopoly model. So physics picked a winner, franchises drew the fence, and the meter made money flow. Next came the lock-in, write it into law. In the 1910s and 1920s, states built public utility commissions, quasi-courts where electricity moved from city contracts to a regulated public utility. On paper, this protected you. Stop gouging, ensure service, keep lights on. In practice, it set up incentives with a tilt. Here's how it works in plain English. Regulators decide what counts as the utility's prudent costs. Add up payroll, fuel, maintenance, taxes, plus a return on capital tied to the assets they've built, poles, wires, substations, meters. That pile is the revenue requirement. Divided over expected sales, you get rates. If sales don't show up, the utility files another case. If costs rise, another case. The name for this is cost of service or rate of return regulation. The theory is fairness. The reality is a bias baked into the math, into the Averch-Johnson effect from the 1960s. Fancy name, simple point. If the allowed return on capital beats the cost of capital, the model incentivizes capital over everything else. Build more, put it in the rate base, and earnings grow. Spend on operating efficiency. That doesn't earn the same return. The result is gold plating, bigger substations, thicker wires, extra gear that may not be the cheapest path to reliability. Did you know regulators tried to fix this by tightening prudence reviews and leaning on regulatory lag, so utilities carried some risk between rate cases? Good idea, spotty results. Later, some places tried price caps or revenue caps to mimic competition, but the core stayed the same across most states. Earnings lean on capital, not on helping you use less. So when we say the model wasn't built for efficiency, we're not dunking on engineers. We're describing the scoreboard they're forced to play to. Now layer in the legal fences. No third wires rules meant you couldn't run a second set of lines down a street for competition. Resale bans said you couldn't buy power from the utility and sell it to your neighbor across the fence without becoming a regulated utility yourself. Duplication laws and certificate of convenience and necessity processes let incumbents argue that any rival line was wasteful. All of this sounds tidy when you picture two companies fighting on Main Street, but it also swept up bottom-up innovation. A church sharing rooftop solar with the daycare next door. Sorry, resale. A factory wheeling surplus power to a sister site across town, probably blocked by franchise rights or transmission tariffs. The meter model tolerated your load, not your independent. At the just and reasonable rate standard. Courts said regulators don't have to micromanage methods as long as the end result is fair to customers and investors. That created flexibility, which was good, but it also entrenched the compact, exclusive territory in exchange for an obligation to serve and a fair return. The Lincoln Institute describes this as a relational contract. The Our Energy Policy history calls it an ongoing equilibrium. Both are right, but equilibrium for who? When your earnings grow by building assets and selling throughput, conservation looks like a threat to be managed, not a goal to be chased. Here's a fun fact. Even when reforms happen, wholesale markets in some regions, retail competition experiments in a handful of states, the distribution monopoly largely stayed intact. MIT's Josko and Schmalency note that about 3/4 of U.S. customers still buy through investor-owned distributors governed by cost-of-service principles. Distribution, and in many places, bundled transmission remain regulated monopoly. So the stage where your bill is set has the same props. Rate base, allowed return, test years, expert testimony, settlements that translate into the line items you squint at each month. And remember the rural story? Private utilities skipped thinly populated areas for decades because the numbers didn't pencil. Rural electrification only took off when public money and co-ops stepped in. After that, the cost of service bargain spread everywhere and hardened. Aging assets, put them in rate base and recover. New modernization, same. Climate resilience, same. None of that is evil. Grids need investment. The question is whether the model overselects for capital-heavy answers when cheaper, local, or non-wires options would do. Let's be honest, safety was the shield for a lot of these choices. No one wants backfeed endangering line workers. That's valid. But safety turned into a veto on alternatives. Rules against operating during outages unless the utility signs off on expensive controls. Standards that gate even benign peer-to-peer ideas. Standby charges that penalize you for having your own generator because you might impose costs on the network someday. These are not physics constraints alone. They're policy choices that tilt the field. By the 194s through the 197s, regulators and utilities settled into a rhythm. The golden age of steady demand growth, economies of scale, and smooth returns. Then shocks hit, fuel price spikes, environmental rules stalled load growth. Instead of flipping the incentive model, most states doubled down. More trackers and riders to guarantee revenue recovery, faster true-ups, formula rates that, as MIT notes, can function like automatic cost plan. Each patch made revenue more certain and your role more predictable. Keep paying the meter. So when you open the bill and see riders, residential fixed charge, grid modernization, this is the legal DNA showing up as fees. The logic hasn't changed since the 191s and 192s. Protect the monopoly service, guarantee a fair return, and let capital steer behavior, which sets up the next collision. Because the moment rooftop solar and batteries offered you a real way to use less from the meter, or route around it entirely, the legal machine reacted exactly as designed. The wires, empire, and holding companies. So the model is locked in law. Watch what capital does with it. The next move wasn't more lamps, it was paperwork. In the 1900s and 1910s, bosses stitched city systems into regional empires using holding companies, not wires at first stock. A parent firm buys a utility, that utility buys another, and soon you've got a pyramid across states. On the street it looks local, Springfield Electric. On the ledger it's line 47, in a stack controlled from a distant boardroom. Here's a fun fact. By the late 192s, these pyramids controlled power in most big cities and a lot of small ones too. One share at the top could command layers of subsidiaries below because each level borrowed to buy the next. It was leverage on leverage, with your monthly bill steadying the whole tower. Cross-subsidies moved cash from one region to another, hiding true costs and smothering accountability. If Springfield's rates seemed fine, maybe it's because your dollars were quietly propping up a sister company 2 states away. Why build like this? Because the monopoly compact plus cost of service made expansion safer than in normal markets. When returns depend on capital in the rate base and sales through the meter, rolling up more territories means more meters and more capital to earn on. It's Samuel Insull's grow and build strategy scaled with finance. You don't win by shaving costs. You win by owning the wire that everyone must use and stacking assets the regulator will call prudent. You might be surprised to learn who got left out. Rural America. Thinly populated counties didn't pencil for investor-owned utilities. Poles over miles for a handful of meters. Hard sell when Wall Street wants predictable returns. So while cities glowed, farmhouses stayed dark into the 193s. The fix didn't come from the holding companies. It came from public money and co-ops, neighbors banding together with federal loans to build lines the big guys ignored. That's a tell. When the business model doesn't see profit, it doesn't see people. Standardization also became a quiet weapon. The bigger the holding company footprints got, the more they pushed uniform gear, uniform voltages, uniform planning. Sounds tidy, but it crushed experimentation, combined heat and power at factories that could have slashed fuel waste. Hard to fit into a one-size-fits-all tariff. Small hydro and neighborhood engines that matched local needs. Labeled uneconomic, inside spreadsheets tuned for central station. The standard grid got very good at moving bulk power from a few plants to many meters. It got worse at letting many small sources serve the places they sat. Regulators cut deals to manage this growth. In rate cases, utilities showed up with thick binders. New substation here, bigger line there, reliability upgrade over here. The promise was always the same. More assets, more reliability, eventually lower unit costs. And because cost of service pays a return on capital, each approved project fattened the rate base. This is where the Averch-Johnson capital bias bites in practice. If a non-wires alternative, like paying a neighborhood to reduce load at peak, solves the problem cheaper but doesn't grow the asset base, it loses in the boardroom before it reaches the hearing. Talk about perverse incentives. In theory, the cheapest fix should win. In this empire, the fix that earns the allowed return often does. Watch how modernization dollars flow. New wires, green light, advanced meters that cut truck rolls. Yes, if capitalized. Weatherize homes so you need fewer wires. That's operating expense or someone else's budget. Less attractive. The scoreboard shapes the playbook. Then came the crash. The 193s exposed the holding company pyramids as wobbly. Some reforms broke up the worst excesses, but notice what survived. The local monopoly model stayed. The cost of service engine stayed. The obligation to serve stayed. The empire learned to look simpler on paper while keeping the core intact. Exclusive territories feeding rate-based assets managed by state commission. Wartime command habits in the 194s only reinforced central planning instincts. After victory, the structure rolled on. Rural lines finally spread under co-ops, proving a different incentive mix can deliver. Member owners cared about service and price, not shareholder returns. Their success makes a quiet point the big empires prefer you forget. Structure beats technology. Same electrons, different rules, opposite results. By the 195s and 196s, the wires empire hit its golden returns era. Demand soared as homes filled with appliances and air conditioning. Big plants ran full. The capital bias looked like genius because throughput hid waste. But look closely and you'll see the DNA didn't change. The empire grew by building and by binding every new load to a meter under its control. Even when wholesale markets appeared decades later, the distribution monopolies remained the toll booth you couldn't drive around. Here's the reframe that matters now. The wires empire wasn't just poles in the ground. It was a planning culture that defaulted to concrete and copper first. That culture, married to holding company finance, nudged every choice toward bigger and farther instead of nearer and smarter. And it set the stage for the next act in our story, where crises, blackouts, fuel shocks, and new tech should have broken the habit, but somehow the leash on your wall only tightened. Crises that strengthened control. Crises should crack a system open, right? In the wires empire, they mostly poured new concrete on the same foundation. Start with the Great Depression. The holding company pyramids wobbled and fell, scandals splashed, and Congress swung an axe. Break up the worst stacks, shine light on finances, push fraud out. Necessary. But notice what stayed sacred. Exclusive territories, the obligation to serve, and cost of service returns. The monopoly model didn't end. It got laundered. Regulators gained more power, but the scoreboard they enforced. Earn on capital, recover prudent costs, barely budge. In wartime, the 194s turned electric planning into a command exercise. Central coordination, rationing, do what works now. After victory, those habits stuck. Big agencies, top-down forecasts, bulk plant size to meet surging industrial and suburban load. You can see why. The 195s and 196s felt like proof that scale solved everything. More people, more air conditioners, more malls. Utilities built, and the allowed returns rolled. The grow and build DNA looked like public service. It was also the safest path for earnings because the rulebook paid reliably for cement and steel. Blackouts should have broken that instinct. Instead, they became leverage. Whenever a major outage hit, the playbook came out. We need to upgrade, approve this substation, this line, this control center. Otherwise, it happens again. And regulators, with everyone yelling at them, said yes. Heads they win, tails you pay. Outage credits show up as tiny line items. The bigger bill for reliability investments arrives a year later and stays. If a cheaper non-wires fix could have reduced risk, like targeted efficiency or local storage, it often lost to the path that fit rate-based math. Then fuel shocks in the 197s. Input prices spiked, demand sagged, and suddenly the golden returns era went lumpy. Cost of service bent, but it didn't break. New trackers and riders appeared so utilities could pass through fuel costs faster and stabilize cash flow. Some commissions tried least cost planning and demand-side management. Good steps, but the Averch-Johnson capital bias didn't vanish just because a few programs paid homeowners to insulate attic. Under traditional regulation, CapEx still earns a return. Most OpEx doesn't. So efficiency became a program, while megaprojects remained the core business. Here's where the paradox hardens. Every kilowatt hour you save cuts utility revenue unless a decoupling mechanism or rider makes them whole. Some states adopted decoupling to reduce the throughput incentive. Helpful, but partial. Because even with decoupling, capital stays the earnings engine. A utility can support you buying an efficient fridge and still prefer building a feeder line to a new subdivision because one is an expense and the other becomes a 30-year annuity. The rules didn't hate efficiency. They just didn't love it the way they loved assets. New tech kept knocking. Early solar pilots building cogeneration, smarter controls. And again, rules caged it. Interconnection standards crawled. Standby rates penalized on-site generation just in case you might lean on the grid later. Net metering, where it appeared, was a pressure valve, not independence. In places with aggressive pilots, caps limited scale. The message was steady. Innovation can help, but only inside the fence and on the utility's timeline. Meanwhile, planning culture grew more legalistic. Rate cases turned into ritual combat. Engineers, economists, and lawyers arguing test years, depreciation, prudence. MIT's analysis calls out how formula rates and frequent trackers erode the incentive bite of regulatory lag, drifting toward automatic cost-plus. Translation: revenue recovery got smoother for utilities, not riskier. And when risk declines on the earnings side, experimentation outside the asset base has even less pull. Let's be honest, not every commission rolled over. Some pushed performance-based tweaks. Others forced utilities to procure efficiency first. But the national picture barely moved. Investor-owned distributors serving most customers under cost-of-service principles that reward capital and treat sales erosion as a threat. Even modernization, waves, advanced meters, new control software arrived as CapEx. If the investment reduced truck rolls and operating costs, great. The real win was that it could be rate-based. The pattern is boring and brutal. Crisis, public anger, hearing room, capital plan approved, repeat. Each loop tightens the leash on your wall a notch because every approved asset extends the promise of returns into the future. And every future return relies on you staying on the meter. When rooftop solar and batteries finally made a real dent in that dependency, the system didn't suddenly embrace them. It reached for the same tools it had refined through decades of crisis: law, rate design, and narrative. Which is where we go next. Moment the model meta technology that could let you pay less, and the counterpunch that tried to make sure you wouldn't. Midpoint, the efficiency paradox. So here's the knot at the center of everything. The grid's business model makes less usage a problem. Not, oops, we miscounted, a structural problem. Under cost of service, revenue recovers prudent costs plus an allowed return on capital spread over expected sales. Fewer kilowatt hours, same fixed costs, smaller denominator. Rates go up to make the math whole. You save, your neighbor pays more, then they try to save too, and the spiral starts to creak. That's the throughput incentive. The machine wants volume. Talk about awkward. Public policy says use less, be efficient. The company's scoreboard says sell more, stay whole. And the Averch-Johnson effect quietly sits behind the curtain, pushing toward capital-heavy fixes, because a new feeder or substation can earn for decades, while a weatherized home or efficient AC shows up as expense. So even well-meaning utility managers face a tilt. If two options solve reliability, the one that grows the rate base wins more often than not. Did you know this paradox shows up in ad campaigns? For decades, utilities told you to electrify everything: ovens, space heat, hot water, because load growth made plants look smart and lowered average costs. Later, when fuel shocks hit and advocates pushed conservation, utilities launched save energy messages while rate cases stacked up riders to true up lost revenue. Heads, they get goodwill for telling you to conserve. Therefore, riders refill the bucket when you actually do it. States tried to patch the mismatch. Decoupling severs the tight link between sales volume and allowed revenue, adjusting bills so utilities don't take a hit when efficiency programs work. Helpful step. But let's be honest, it doesn't flip the bigger tilt. Capital still drives earnings. So a decoupled utility can champion lead bulbs and still prefer a billion-dollar transmission upgrade over a portfolio of local non-wires fixes. Because the upgrade feeds the return on equity math and the fixes don't. Here's a fun fact: demand response, pay customers to shift or shed at peak, often beats wires on cost. You can clip the hottest hour without pouring concrete, but in many places, doctor is booked as operating expense while the feeder is capital. Guess which one shareholders like? Regulators nudge all source solutions, yet culture defaults to physical assets. Steel feels safer in a hearing than software and neighbors. Peak pricing then shows up as the marketish answer. Time of use rates send you a signal. Power's cheap at 2 a.m., pricey at 5 p.m. Good economics, lousy freedom if the rest of the structure stays the same. You might shift laundry, maybe pre-cool the house, but you're still playing inside the same meter model. The utility's risk drops when you obey the signal. Your bill might drop a bit too. The leverage doesn't change. They hold the switch, you hold the chores. Now bring rooftop solar into this. When you make a kilowatt hour on your own roof, that's one less the meter sells you. Multiply that by a neighborhood and the growth story breaks. This is the moment the cost shift talking point appears. Utilities say solar customers avoid paying for fixed grid costs, so non-solar customers pick up the tab. Sometimes that's paired with higher fixed charges, grid access fees, or slashed export credits. The irony: many analyses that count full system benefits, reduced line losses, deferred upgrades, local resilience, find solar can pull its weight or more. But inside the old scorecard, the threat isn't physics, it's revenue erosion. Let's be honest, interconnection friction is part of the same paradox. The more friction, the slower the sales erosion. So you see studies that take months, queues that don't move, requirements that feel like a moving target. Safety is the stated reason. Sometimes it's real. Often it's a blanket that covers delay. Because every approved inverter that can island or every block-level microgrid is a tiny cut to the central control store. Many cuts add up. Policy tried another patch. Energy efficiency resource standards, appliance rules, weatherization programs. They help. Bills drop, emissions drop. But look at who runs the programs and how they're funded. In many states, the utility runs them and recovers costs through riders, sometimes even earning incentives for performance. Great, except the bigger prize, changing the core incentive from grow the asset base to grow delivered outcomes, often stays off the table. Performance-based regulation can push that way, and groups like RMI have roadmaps. Adoption is slow, so the paradox keeps showing up like a watermark. You time-shift dinner, you swap bulbs, maybe you install a heat pump. Good moves, personal wins, But system-wide, the meter model still treats your lower usage as a hole to fill, not a mission accomplished. Therefore, bills inch up through fixed charges or new riders. Therefore, planners default to capital cures. Therefore, your independence is tolerated as long as it props up the same spine. Here's the sharper question. Can a meter-centered model ever reward using less as the main event? Not as a side program, but as the business. Right now, the honest answer is no. Not without flipping how utilities earn. Until earnings lean on outcomes, reliability, affordability, emissions, resilience, rather than raw capital and throughput, your best moves will keep feeling like you're swimming upstream. And that brings us to the next collision. If cutting usage inside the meter can't win the game, what about routing around the meter? Rooftop solar, batteries, microgrids, real independence, at least in slices. The model saw that coming too, and it had a plan. Rooftop solar meets the fine print. So you decide to route around the meter. Panels on the roof. Simple idea, right? Sun hits silicon, your meter slows down, your bill drops. That's the dream. And that's exactly where the fine print shows up with a clipboard and a smile. Net metering is the gateway most folks hear about. The pitch sounds fair. When you export a kilowatt hour to the grid, you get credited at roughly what you pay to buy one. For years, that helped shorten the payback. But look at how the rules move. First, utilities push to carve out pieces of the retail rate. Sure, we'll credit you for the energy piece, but not for transmission, distribution, and public purpose charges. Then came time-of-use rules that pay you less right when your panels are busiest midday. Same electrons, different story. Here's a fun fact. In 2013, a report called Disruptive Challenges hit utility desks. It warned that rooftop solar efficiency and demand response could trigger a utility death spiral as customers bought less from the meter. A playbook followed in cases. Step 1, say solar customers don't pay their fair share of fixed grid costs. Step 2, call it a cost shift. Step 3, raise fixed charges, add grid access fees, and cut export credit. The model incentivizes those moves to protect throughput. You might be surprised to learn how effective that narrative became. In case after case, the phrase cost shift turned into a sledgehammer. Commissions heard it so often it started sounding like math. But when independent analysts tally full system effects, reduced line losses, deferred substation upgrades, local generation during hot peaks, the value can run close to or above the retail rate. The problem is that solar doesn't help. The problem is the meter model hates losing throughput. Take California's shift to the net billing tariff, known as NEM3. Export credits moved from retail-like values to hourly rates tied to avoided costs, cutting average compensation by about 3/4 versus earlier rules. Overnight, payback broke for many homes unless you added a battery, and even then, value depends on how you may use it. That wasn't random. Model incentivizes steering you back toward the meter. Interconnection is where the soft war shows up. On paper, there's a process. Submit your design, wait for a study, get upgrades scoped, sign, install, inspect, permission to operate. In practice, clocks stretch. Screens turn into months. Minor upgrades get priced like kitchen remodels. A feeder that looks fine in one study suddenly needs relaying in the next. Safety is the headline, delay is the subtext. Every extra step adds cost, and cost lengthens payback. And lengthened payback scares off the next 5 customers on your block. Then there are charges that look surgical but cut deep. Fixed customer charges that jump from, say, $10 to $30 a month. Minimum bills that say, even if you net to zero, you still owe us this floor. Demand charges for homes. Yes, homes based on your highest 15-minute spike. And grid access fees only for solar customers because apparently using less creates more cost. Heads the utility gets revenue certainty. Tails your savings collapse. Did you know some places layered on departing load or standby fees if you pair solar with storage? The logic goes, you might depend on the grid at peak someday, so pay us monthly just in case. That turns your battery into an annuity for them. And when utilities propose their own community solar or green riders, notice the control flips back. You fund panels on their land, they keep the asset on their rate base, and your bill credit arrives pre-approved and capped. HOAs and local zoning can be another speed bump. Height limits, glare studies, setback debates that drag, often solvable but they stack with everything else. Lease and PPA contracts add their own traps, low teaser rates, escalators later, transfer clauses that complicate selling your house, buyout math that only makes sense if you never do it. You went solar to gain control. The fine print slowly sells it back. Let's be honest, not every cost shift claim is pure fiction. Rate design has real problems. When most recovery sits in per kilowatt-hour charges, anyone who buys fewer kilowatt-hours pays less of the fixed stuff. That's math. But there are two honest ways to handle it. One is rebalance rates across all customers with modest fixed charges and strong time signal. The other is update the value stack so exported kilowatt-hours earn credit for the actual costs they avoid, including local deferrals. The dishonest way is to keep jacking fixed fees while slashing export values below what the grid saves, then blaming your neighbor's panels for bills that were going up anyway. Here's the tell: when utilities push steep fixed charges across the board, they also solve their other headache, the throughput incentive, by making more of your bill immune to your choices. Using less helps you less. Solar helps you less. Suddenly, everything you do feels like swimming with weights on. That's not engineering. That's policy shaped by a business model. So what do? You read the tariff like a detective. Watch for export credit structures that fall off a cliff. For interconnection, supplemental studies with no clear end. For residential demand charges with short intervals. For grid access fees that only hit solar customers. For standby rates that punish batteries. You push your commission for fair value studies done by independent analysts, not just the utilities consultant. You back smarter rate design that doesn't kill rooftop economics while still sending time signals. And one more thing. If the rules keep squeezing rooftop solar the moment it starts to scale, ask why the same urgency doesn't hit the big capital plans. If cost shift is the panic phrase for a few % of customers with panels, where's the panic for gold-plated substation rebuilds that could have been deferred by targeted local resources? Funny how one kind of shift gets a headline and the other slides quietly into modernization. We're not done. Because even if you thread the rooftop maze, the next gate is who controls your battery and whether your system can run when the grid is down. That's where the islanding rules and standby charges live, technical sounding, legally sharp, very effective at pulling your independence back inside the fence. Microgrids, batteries, and the soft war. So you got the panels up, maybe even a battery in the garage. Next question, can your system run when the grid is down? Here's where the rules get real quiet and very sharp. Most rooftop systems are wired with anti-islanding protection. That means the instant the grid drops, your inverter shuts off too. Even on a sunny day, you're dark. The headline reason is crew safety. No one wants a backfed line while workers fix poles. Fair. But the way the standard is written becomes a blanket veto. Unless you add specialized controls and paperwork the utility approves. You might be surprised to learn there are safe ways to island. Smart inverters and transfer switches can open your connection, form a tiny grid, and keep things alive. Hospitals and bases do it, some campuses too, but for homes and neighborhoods, approvals crawl. Rules bury islanding behind additional studies. Protections that are fine for utility-owned microgrids look risky when they're yours. The result, unless you buy approved gear and pass extra checks, your battery is a nice UPS that only works when the utility says so. Here's a fun fact. Even when your system can island safely, tariffs can box you in. Standby charges show up with names like backup service or reservation capacity. The logic goes, if you self-supply sometimes, you still rely on us as insurance, so pay us monthly just in case. That fee lands whether you call on the grid or not. It's a leash charge. Pair that with minimum bills and fixed customer charges, and you've rebuilt the meter's power inside your independent setup. Let's be honest, batteries got rebranded fast. They started as your tool for self-reliance. Then utilities recast them as grid assets. Join our program, they say. We'll control your battery a few hours a year for peak shaving. In return, you get a small rebate or bill credit. Sometimes that's a good trade. Sometimes it's you buying a battery, then renting it back to the utility on their terms while islanding remains blocked. The value flows up the wire. The control stays there too. Aggregation is next. The company bundles home batteries and thermostats into a virtual power plant, bids that flexibility into markets, and shares revenue. Great idea, but watch who sits in the middle. In many states, the utility claims the right to be the aggregator or the exclusive router of services. Your flexibility can be bought cheap and resold dear. If you try an independent aggregator, you may hit participation rules that make it not worth it. Did you know some interconnection handbooks flat out prohibit planned islanding at the distribution level unless the microgrid is utility controlled? The wording varies, but the gist is consistent. A community microgrid that can separate and run on local solar and storage is treated like a threat unless it sits behind a single customer meter or a utility gate. That keeps the topology simple on paper. It also keeps authority one way. You can build resilience, sure. Just let us own the switch. Then there's the study and upgrade maze. Propose a neighborhood microgrid. Now you're funding feeder studies, protection coordination, maybe even recloser upgrades. The utility decides the scope, schedules the work, and invoices you. If they own the microgrid, those costs go into rate base and get socialized. If you own it, they're applicant funded. Same device, different payer. That's the capital bias in costume. Build it our way and earn a return. Build it your way and pay cash. Standby rate design adds teeth. Demand ratchets lock in a high monthly charge based on your worst 15-minute import over months. One bad spike while testing the microgrid and you pay for it all summer. Some tariffs also add departing load charges if your local generation reduces contribution to system costs that were planned years ago. Translation: the spreadsheet assumes your meter would keep buying. If you don't, you owe a goodbye gift. Look at language around non-wires alternatives. On paper, regulators nudge utilities to consider local storage and demand response instead of new lines. But when a community proposes its own micro-utility to solve a constraint, franchise rules and anti-resale laws pop up. You can reduce your own load. Selling across the alley, different story. That is not a technical limit. It's a boundary drawn to protect the franchise. Here's the core question this section forces. Who owns your electrons once created? If sunlight hits your roof and fills your battery, do you have full say over when and how to use it? Or does interconnection make those electrons subject to terms that reroute their value? So far, the soft war says the latter. Islanding rules keep you dark when the grid is dark. Standby charges tax your independence. Aggregation corrals your flexibility. And every safety gate doubles as a control gate. None of this says skip safety. It says separate safety from monopoly habit. A safe, standards-based microgrid can protect crews, neighbors, and itself. We do it in hospitals and airports every day. The difference at home and on your block is who gets to flip the boundary switch and keep the benefits. If the answer is always the utility, then your battery isn't freedom. It's another part of the meter model, smarter, shinier, still leashed. Places that broke the script. So after all that, does anyone actually beat the model? Yes, when the structure flips. Same electrons, different rules, wildly different results. Start with municipal utilities. Did you know over 2,000 U.S. towns run their own power? No distant shareholders, no quarterly earnings call, just a city department with a simple job: keep rates low and lights on. When a muni invests, there's no return on equity baked into your bill. Debt gets paid, maintenance gets done, and any surplus rolls back to you as lower rates or local upgrades. You feel it in the bill. Fewer riders, fewer mystery fees. And when there's a choice between a non-wires fix and a shiny substation, the tide doesn't always go to capital because there's no bonus for gold plating. Co-ops push this even further. You're not a customer, you're a member owner. Profits, they're called margins, and they come back as capital credits. Co-ops electrified rural America precisely because investor-owned utilities wouldn't. That incentive map still shows up today. A co-op that can defer a feeder upgrade with targeted efficiency will try it because keeping member bills low is the scoreboard. They're not perfect. Old contracts and wholesale supply deals can lock them in, but the cultural default is service first. Here's a fun fact. When co-ops roll out community solar, the math can be refreshingly honest. Panels go up near town, subscriptions are priced to match costs, credits map to production, and there's no need to invent a grid access fee to protect a monopoly spread. Members see the array when they drive by. They know who to call if something breaks. Accountability lives down the road, not in a rate case 3 cities away. Island grids make the point in neon. On islands where importing fuel is painful, the economics force creativity. High renewable shares plus storage on a think piece, their survival. So you see microgrids at the feeder level, smart controls and batteries that actually run when the main line trips. The safety story doesn't go away. It just becomes engineering, not a blanket veto. When the boundary switch needs to open, it opens. People keep the lights on with assets they can point to. What about peer-to-peer? Pilots like the Brooklyn microgrid let neighbors trade local solar with blockchain metering. Electrons still flowed on Con Edison's wires, the ledger tracked value. Cool idea, right? Regulators hit the brakes, not because physics failed, but because franchise rules treat sales across a property line like utility business. The lesson is clean. Tech wasn't the bottleneck, permission was. Let's be honest, even municipalization, the act of a city taking its system back, runs into a minefield. Franchise contracts expire on utility-friendly timelines. Buyout valuations assume decades of future monopoly profits. Lawsuits drag on, and citizens get spooked by price tags that bake in the incumbents' expected earnings. But when cities push through, the numbers can flip for decades. Boulder tried. It learned how hard the fence is. Winter Park, Florida did it. Outages fell, tree trimming improved, rates stabilized. Structure beats tech. You might be surprised to learn that community choice programs in some states let cities buy power on behalf of residents, while the incumbent still runs poles and wires. It's half a flip, but it shows what happens when procurement power shifts. Suddenly, rooftop and local storage matter in planning. Suddenly, non-wires options can win because the buyer's goal is bill reduction, not asset expansion. There are also campus and district microgrids, universities, hospitals, downtown blocks where ownership lives close and the rules carve out space. They island during storms. They optimize heat and power together. They prove that safety and self-reliance can sit in the same sentence when incentives line up. The grid operator coordinates boundaries. The local owner runs the show inside. No drama, just engineering. So what ties these wins together? Ownership, access, rules. When the entity serving you is accountable to you, capital bias loses its teeth. When data and interconnection are open by default, islanding becomes a design choice, not a forbidden word. When rate design honors local value, deferred upgrades, loss reductions, resilience, the cost shift story melts into better math. And here's the kicker. None of this needs perfect tech. It needs permission. Municipal boards that vote in public. Co-op members who show up. Regulators who ask, what outcome are we paying for? Instead of, how fast can we approve the asset list? Places that broke the script didn't hack physics. They rewrote the contract around the meter, which is exactly what you need next. Because if structure beats tech, your next move isn't just hardware. It's learning to read your bill like a detective and fighting where the numbers are set. Read the bill like a detective. Grab your latest bill. Don't skim the total. We're going line by line like a crime scene. First line, customer charge or basic service fee. That's the cover charge just to stand in the room before a single electron moves. If that number has been creeping up, that's the model shifting revenue from usage to fix, so your choices matter less. Next, the per kilowatt hour line. Simple on the surface, but often split. You'll see energy, then delivery or distribution, sometimes transmission. Energy is the commodity from generators. Delivery and transmission are the poles, wires, substations, the parts that earn the return on capital. If delivery dwarfs energy, you're living inside a grid that's been building a lot and wants those earnings steady. Now the riders: fuel cost adjustment, storm recovery, environmental compliance, grid modernization. These true up costs outside normal rates. Helpful sometimes, but together they say this: the utility shifts risk. Fuel spikes, you cover it. Storm, you cover it for years. Modernization sounds shiny, but ask what it bought. Advanced meters, new feeders, or software and sensors that beat copper on cost. Capital bias can hide in that word. Find anything called public purpose or systems benefits. Those usually fund efficiency, low-income assistance, research. Good stuff, but check the size. If that bucket is tiny compared to grid modernization, you're watching lip service to efficiency while capital eats the main course. Look for minimum bills and demand charges. A minimum bill says, even if you net to zero, pay the floor. That guts rooftop savings and dulls efficiency wins. Demand charges for homes are rarer, but they're spreading. If you see one, read the interval. 15-minute peaks are brutal. One spike while the oven, AC, and dryer overlap and your month jumps. That's a quiet way to lock in revenue while blaming fair cost recovery. Time of use, scan the on-peak price versus off-peak. Big spreads can help if you can shift loads. But watch for super off-peak. That's 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. Great for EVs, not so great for the rest of life. If your bill shows you used most energy off-peak but your total didn't fall, hidden fixed pieces are canceling your effort. See decoupling true up or revenue balancing. That's the mechanism that keeps the company whole when sales drop. In theory, it removes the pressure to sell more. In practice, it can become a quiet ratchet, small adds to your bill each period so revenue hits the target. Not evil, but combined with capital returns, it means your cuts don't dent earnings much. Grid access or solar customer charges, those are the surgical strikes. If you've got panels, these fees flatten your payback. Pair them with slashed export credits and suddenly the spread between what your neighbor pays for your noon electron and what you're paid to supply it lands in the utility's pocket. That's the cost shift story turned inside out. Interconnection fees might not be on the monthly bill, but they show up on project invoices. Study fees, relay upgrades, meter swaps. Ask for itemization. If a supplemental study appears with no timeline and no cap, push back. Utilities have standards. You deserve specifics. Outage credits look nice. $5 here, 10 there for long blackouts. Now compare that to the rider for storm hardening. One is a tip, the other is dinner. If area gets repeat outages and the hardening charges keep rising, ask your commission for the cost-benefit on non-wires options, tree trimming frequency, targeted undergrounding, sectionalizing, local storage. If the plan defaults to big rebuilds, you're seeing the capital tilt. Here, how to read patterns. Rising fixed charges plus falling volumetric rates equals your control shrinking. New riders stacking up equals risk shifting to you. Delivery costs climbing faster than energy equals asset growth driving bills. Special charges for distributed generation equals protecting the meter model. What to flag locally? Proposals to raise fixed residential charges above, say, $10 to $15. That's a red alert for gutting efficiency and solar economics. Residential demand charges with short intervals. Push for hourly or longer or none at all. Export credit cuts without a transparent, independent value of solar study that includes local deferrals and loss reduction. Modernization plans with few non-wires projects. Demand side should compete head-to-head with wires. Interconnection timelines without service-level guarantees. Ask for deadlines and automatic fee refunds if missed. Where to fight? City council when franchise agreements renew. That's leverage. Ask for performance terms, outage targets, tree trimming cycles, non-wires quotas, data access. Your commission's rate cases. Submit a short comment, cite the patterns on your bill, ask why delivery is outpacing energy. Ask for capital spending alternatives. Utility boards if you're a co-op or Muni member. Push to cap fixed charges, favor time-based rates with protections, and fund local projects first. Finally, track your own data. Get interval reads from your meter or inverter. Compare your load shape to your rate design. The more you know about when you use, the better you can dodge expensive windows, and the cleaner your case when you argue that a neighborhood battery or efficiency program beats another mile of wire. Read the bill like a detective, because the clues to your leverage are hiding in plain sight. The fork in the wires. So now you've got the lay of the land. The rules tilt toward capital. The meter model wants throughput. Rooftop solar and batteries run into the fine print, which means you're standing at a fork. One path is bigger, more centralized, more automatic charges on your bill. The other is dense local networks that shift power, literal and political, closer to you. You don't have to jump to off-grid tomorrow. You climb in steps. Let's map the tiers. Tier 1 is efficiency you own, not the poster, the hardware. Air sealing, insulation, heat pump water heater, induction cooktop, smart thermostat. It's unglamorous, but every kilowatt hour you never buy dodges riders, dodges losses, dodges drama. Track it with interval data, because timing beats totals when rates are time-based. Tier 2 is load shifting. You move what you can out of on peak. Pre-cool, preheat, run the washer later, charge the EV cheap at night. Add a simple home energy management system that watches your rate windows and handles it without you babysitting. The goal is to make price signals work for you without your life turning into a part-time job. Tier 3 is local generation. Panels you own, sized to your roof and your pattern. If export credits are weak, aim to self-consume more. Orient some panels west, run daytime loads when the sun's up, and right size so you're not giving away too much value. Read the tariff first. If your utility carves out transmission and distribution from credits, design accordingly. Tier 4 is storage. A battery turns time into leverage. Charge cheap, discharge expensive. Keep the fridge and lights on when the grid blinks. Key point, buy gear that can island safely and that you control. Get a listed transfer switch or hybrid inverter that can form a microgrid at your panel. If the interconnection handbook fences you out, document it and push. Many standards already support safe islanding. Tier 5 is neighborhood moves. Think micro-utility instead of DIY island. That could be a shared battery at the end of a constrained feeder, co-op-owned solar on a school roof, or a block-level microgrid that can separate during storms. The tech is there. The friction is legal, franchise rights, resale bans, standby rates, so you time your push with leverage moments. Which brings us to the legal path. Your city's franchise agreement with the utility expires on a calendar, not a whim. That's a door. When renewal comes up, the council can demand performance terms, outage benchmarks, non-wires quotas, data access via open APIs, interconnection timelines with automatic refunds if missed. Tie extensions to meeting those terms, not vague promises. Municipalization is the big swing. It's hard. Incumbents will quote scary buyout numbers that bake in decades of future profits. But some cities do it and win on reliability and rate control. If your town is considering it, get real appraisals, not just the utilities. Study Winter Park's playbook. Learn from Boulder's Scar. If a full Muni is a bridge too far, push for community choice aggregation where it's allowed. Let your city control procurement even if the incumbent still runs the polls. Co-op conversions are another route. Some small towns have flipped service to a neighboring co-op when franchises expire. Members vote, assets transfer. The incentive map changes overnight. If you're already in a co-op, you have direct levers, bylaws, board elections, capital credits policy. Use them. Now contracts. Avoid leases or PPAs that lock you in with steep escalators, vague maintenance, or clauses that hand control of your inverter settings to someone else. Read islanding and aggregation terms. If a virtual power plant program wants dispatch rights, fine, but negotiate transparency on events, caps on cycles, and opt-out rules. Your battery shouldn't become free labor. Interconnection clauses matter. Ask for firm timelines, clear screening criteria, and published queue status. If the utility requires upgrades, get itemized scopes and alternatives. For microgrids, push early for a study that includes intentional islanding under IEE standards, not just don't island. If they insist on applicant-funded, compare that to what it would cost if utility-owned, and use the spread as a talking point at the commission. Data is a lever. Own your meter data, inverter data, and circuit-level home data. Pull 15-minute or hourly reads. Share anonymized patterns with neighbors to build a case for a shared battery that knocks down a feeder peak. When you show up with numbers that match the utility's planning intervals, your non-wires stop sounding like a blog post and start sounding like a plan. Here's the mindset shift. You're not just a customer trimming your bill. You're part of a local network building options. Start with the stuff that pays back on its own. Stack storage when rates and rebates make it click. Then organize block clubs, houses of worship, PTAs around one shared project the rules still allow. Use that as a wedge in the next franchise renewal. If your city has a climate plan, tie your ask to it. If your co-op has capital credits, tie your project to reducing system peaks that speed credits up. Two futures are on the table. One is passive, rising fixed charges, more riders, bigger projects you never see, and your battery working mostly for someone else. The other is active, local hardware you own, data you can read, rules you help write, and dollars staying closer to home. The fork isn't abstract. It's sitting on your wall, counting. Decide who that meter works for. Ownership, access, and rules. So let's make this simple. If structure beats tech, your leverage is three things: what you own, what you can see, and which rules you can touch. Hardware, data, governance. Get those pointed the right way and the meter starts working for you instead of on you. Start with hardware you truly own. Panels are obvious, but the brain matters more. Buy the inverter and gateway that decide when you import, export, and island. Make sure it supports safe islanding with a listed transfer switch or hybrid mode, not just anti-islanding shutdown. Ask one blunt question. If the grid drops, can this keep my critical loads alive without a phone call to anyone? If the answer is it depends on a program, keep shopping. Batteries come with strings now. Vendors love grid services enabled. That can help or hand control to someone else. Read the dispatch rights. Can the utility or aggregator drain your battery on a hot night and leave you empty for a storm? What's the max cycles per year? You get real-time notice and an opt-out. If not, negotiate or walk. Your battery's first job is your house. Anything after that is a contract, not charity. Own your switching. A manual or automatic transfer switch at your main panel is boring and powerful. It defines the border of your microgrid and keeps line workers safe. It also stops 1,000 what-ifs in interconnection purgatory. When the grid is out, your side is cleanly separated. That's engineering, not vibes, and it shuts down a lot of safety theater. Now data, you can't steer what you can't see. Pull your hourly or 15-minute usage from the utility meter. Many states require access. If not, add a clip-on monitor at your main. Pair it with inverter data so you know generation, exports, imports, state of charge. You want a timeline of your day every day. That's how you tune loads, right-size storage, and build a case for local projects. Ask for open APIs. If your gear locks data behind an app wall, you'll hate it in a year. You need local access that doesn't die when a cloud service changes hands. Keep it simple. CSV export, local web dashboard, home assistant integration if you're nerdy. The point is control lives with you, not in a password you can't reset. Share just enough. Neighbors don't need your toothbrushing schedule, but a block-level load profile helps you pitch a shared battery to clip a feeder peak. Anonymize, aggregate, and bring printouts to the meeting whether we need a new substation slide appears. When you can show a 2-hour local peak that a 500-kilowatt battery could solve for 1/10 the price, people listen. Rules are where this turns from solo project to community power. Mark your city's franchise expiration on a calendar. That's a pressure point. Show up early with asks that are specific. Interconnection timelines with automatic fee refunds for misses. Non-wires alternatives competing head-to-head with wires. Data access standards. Outage targets tied to tree trimming cycles. Fair value studies for exports that include local deferrals and loss reduction. Tie extensions to performance, not brochures. Your commission isn't a black box. Anyone can file a short comment. Keep it grounded. 1 page, 1 bill chart, 1 ask. Delivery costs have grown twice as fast as energy on my bill. Before approving Substation X, require an all-source procurement that includes local storage and efficiency. That tone works better than rage posting. If you're in a co-op, your vote is real. Board seats matter. Bylaws matter. Push for fixed charges that stay modest, time-based rates with consumer protections, and a member-owned community solar and storage program that credits based on production, not PR. Ask for capital credits to flow faster when non-wires projects cut peaks. Guardrails are not the enemy. Safety is real. Require listed equipment, visible open points, and islanding that actually islands your side when it should. The point is to separate safety from monopoly habit. If a hospital can island by the book, your block can too, with a clear boundary switch and a plan. Loop back to the core question because it decides your next move. Was the grid built for efficiency or for metering? Everything we've walked through says metering. So your job now is to flip the parts you can touch. Own the brain, own the data, show up where the rules get written. That's how the leash on your wall starts to look more like a handle in your hand. Answering the central question. So did the grid get built for efficiency or for metering? Look at the chain. First came exclusive franchises and service territories that banned third wires and resale. That locked customers to one switch. Then came the meter as the business model, kilowatt hours sold, not outcomes delivered. Samuel Insull scaled it with massing of production and grow and build finance, because bigger plants and more customers meant safer return. Law followed. State commissions adopted cost of service, recover prudent costs plus a fair return on invested capital. That sounds neutral until you run the math. The Averch-Johnson effect made capital the fat leg of earnings, so spending more on poles, wires, and substations quietly beat spending on efficiency or local fixes. Gold plating wasn't cartoon greed, it was rational under the rules. Crises didn't flip it. The Great Depression trimmed holding company excess, but kept the monopoly compact. Wartime planning normalized big, central decisions. The 195s and 196s throughput boom made the model look smart. Then the 197s shocks layered on riders and trackers that shifted risk back to you. Wholesale markets arrived in some regions, yet distribution stayed a regulated monopoly for almost 3/4 of customers under cost of service. Just like MIT's Joskow and Schmalensee described. Then came rooftop solar and batteries, the first mainstream path to buy less from the meter. The legal machine responded exactly as designed. The 2013 Disruptive Challenges memo framed distributed energy as an existential revenue threat. The cost shift claim became the cudgel. Say solar avoids fixed costs, hike fixed charges, cut export credits, slow interconnection. Meanwhile, islanding rules, standby charges, and aggregator control kept your hardware tethered. Safety matters, sure, but the blanket veto kept authority one way. Places that changed structure proved the counterfactual. Municipal utilities and co-ops without shareholder returns, favored service, lower rates, and honest non-wires choices. Island grids made resilience engineering, not a myth. Peer-to-peer pilots worked technically but hit the franchise wall. Over and over, the pattern was clear. Structure beats technology. Same electrons, different rules, different results. So the answer is blunt. The grid was not built to maximize efficiency for you. It was engineered to meter, to centralize, and to guarantee returns on capital inside exclusive territories. Efficiency can help around the edges, and policy patches can soften the tilt, but the core scoreboard still pays for assets and throughput, not for you using less or owning more. That's why your best moves feel like swimming upstream, until you change what you own, what you can see, and which rules you can touch. The transformation on offer is practical. You're not stuck as a passive payer. You can become an active owner of hardware that islands safely, of data that exposes cheaper local fixes, and of the civic moments where rate design and franchise terms get set. The lie only works if you accept the leash as normal. You've seen the leash now. Time to decide who holds it. What changes now? Start with the easy wins you control. Audit your home. Air seal, add insulation, swap to a heat pump water heater, and kill phantom loads. Those cuts dodge riders and reduce peaks. Pull your interval data so you can see when, not just how much. Set your thermostat and big appliances to avoid on-peak windows. That's money back fast. If rooftop solar still pencils under your tariff, size it to self-consume more. West tilt a string, run daytime loads when the sun's up, and keep exports modest if credits are weak. Add a battery only if it serves you first. Safe islanding, clear dispatch rights, and local data access. Ask blunt questions before you sign. Can this keep my fridge and lights on without a call? Who can drain it, how often, and when? Level up with neighbors. Share anonymized load shapes, then pitch one concrete non-wires project. A shared battery at the end of a peaky feeder, co-op solar on a school, or targeted weatherization on a block that drives substation upgrades. Bring printouts to City Hall. Ask for an all-source procurement before anyone rubber stamps new wires. Watch your city's franchise clock. When renewal comes up, tie any extension to performance. Outage targets, tree trimming cycles, non-wires quotas, interconnection timelines with automatic refunds if missed, open data APIs. If your state allows community choice, push your council to adopt it so procurement power shifts local. If municipalization is on the table, demand a real valuation and case studies, not scare numbers. At the commission, file one-page comments in rate cases. Chart delivery versus energy growth on your bill. Ask for fair value studies before export cuts. Oppose steep fixed charge hikes and short-interval residential demand charges. Support performance-based pilots that pay for outcomes, reliability, affordability, emissions, rather than just asset. If you're in a co-op, vote. Run. Push bylaws that cap fixed charges, require non-wires to compete head-to-head with wires, and return margins faster when peaks fall. Demand transparent queue data for interconnections and service-level guarantees. Mindset matters. You don't need perfect. You need direction. Own the brain of your system. Own your data. Learn the dates that govern your city's leverage. Pick one rung and climb, then stack the next. Each step shifts power from a meter that counts you to a meter that works for you. By the time you see it, you can't unsee it. That meter is a century-old leash dressed up as a bill. The switch flips both ways if you choose to hold it. Subscribe for more stories that break old systems, then drop your zip code and one grid pane in the comments. We'll map fixes and leverage points together, city by city, block by block.